Tall poppy syndrome. It leads many of us to believe that we don't have influence, or puts us in a position where we don't recognize the influence we actually might have, or puts us in a fearful position of exercising that influence. Why? Because we don't want to exercise it. We don't want to test it out. I recently put up a really great chat with Asadi Youssef, and he's a former hacker, and he spoke about social engineering. And that's what hackers use. It's one example of how they can use their influence to get people to do things that we wouldn't ordinarily do. You know, like social engineering is about conditioning your marketplace. So Robert Cialdini is the author of one of the most influential books on influence, and he's observed 6 universal principles of influence. So the first one is reciprocity. If people give you something, our human nature means we want to return that favor. We want to give them something back. That's reciprocity. His second proposition is scarcity. We want what we can't have. Don't try to convince someone you're trying to influence that there's something available that's in abundance, because they can go get it themselves. You've got to create the incentive for them to commit to it. In other words, it's scarce, I can get it for you. Humans are hardwired to act consistently, that's how their brain works, with other things we've said and done. We build our own structures for the most part, and we stick to them. So if you can get someone to commit to something, chances are they'll stick to it. Human beings like to systemize things. That's why we're so efficient and we're so good at what we've done. We've done a great job of out-surviving every other species through systemization, manualization of things that we commit to. So it's all about patterns. Our brain works as a pattern recognizer. It then rewires or wires itself to the pattern and repeats the pattern. And the more times it affirms a pattern by repetition, the more the pattern becomes indented into our way of operating. Consensus and social proofing. We're social animals. We interact, we communicate, we have communities. We care deeply about what everyone else is doing and thinking, and the vast majority of us do not want to stray from the pack. So how can you apply that lesson when trying to influence others? The answer is this. You need to present the choice as sticking with the pack. It's what everybody wants, as opposed to going about it as a loner or as someone on their own. It is far more attractive that it keeps us in the group. Authority. Just as we build our own structures in our own lives, we build them in our own social groups as well. Visible expressions of authority and expertise influence us to pay attention and listen to what someone is saying. We love authoritative and persuasive speaking. Persuasion is really important. Finally, liking. We're more inclined to listen and to do something if we like the person telling us to do it. How do we get people to like us? Well, similarity breeds likability. People look for themselves in others. Or, if I'm trying to influence, I'll present myself as you are. Or I'll build a common ground. So when I was a young fella in my late 20s, about my late 20s, and I was working in a law firm, the senior partner of that particular firm, David Babsky, who's recently passed away, was considered to be one of the great lawyers in Sydney. He was a senior partner of our firm, and it was always someone I wanted to impress, but more importantly, I wanted to learn from him. And I didn't really consciously think that I wanted to influence him, but my natural instinct was, on certain topics, was to be extraordinarily well researched on that particular topic, to the extent it was something that our firm was specializing in. And I remember there was a section of one of the Acts of Parliament that we specialized in, which consisted of about 15 words. And there are important ways to interpret the construction of a sentence that Parliament has delivered into legislation in order for you to advise your client about the legal aspects of that particular phrase. There are rules around how you interpret the construction of words that are produced by Parliament. And those construction rules are the rules that judges will use to judge your actions relative to the legislation you're acting in. I often would read that particular clause maybe 1,000 times over. Then I wrote down every word in a column and wrote alongside that word in a row what that word could be interpreted as. Then I went through and looked at legislation for construction rules and past cases to try and build up authority on the proposition. Then I wrote a paper, unsolicited, and I submitted it to the senior partner. He didn't ask me to, I just did it. I did it in my own time. And I wrote conclusions as to the way those words in that particular area of expertise which we had in our firm would be interpreted in it by a judge. And the senior partner looked at it, handed it back to me. Didn't say anything, but then I went about it, did it again, and I did it again, and I did it again. I might have done it 20 times. By the end of 6 months of doing this, I think I became an expert on that particular clause of legislation. There wasn't a case I hadn't read. Therefore, I could speak with authority in terms of all the cases. I could speak with authority in terms of how that was drafted in Parliament and what the debates in Parliament were about that particular clause when it was put into place in 1935 or whenever it was. So I read all the Hansard debates. That's the parliamentary debates. Point being here is this: I consistently and persistently delivered something in writing to the senior partner of our law firm, who is the most influential person in the whole place, about an area that our firm was an expert firm in, and I did it authoritatively in that I use other authorities to back up my proposition. So, persistent, consistent, send it to the right person or organisation. I didn't send it to people who aren't even going to bother reading it, who had no interest in it. I never gave up on the proposition at any stage whatsoever. So much so that at the end, the senior partner then dragged me in and said, well, what do you think about this? Why do you say these things? So I ultimately got his engagement. You know, at the same time, I was very close to this particular senior partner at a personal level. And what I mean by that is I was interested in things he was interested in. I wasn't manipulative. I was generally interested in things he was interested in outside of the work we did in a law firm. I guess I didn't try that hard, but he liked me. And I liked him too, by the way. And I was genuine the whole time. And I wasn't trying to get anything from him. I was just simply trying to show him that I understood something, or I was really enthusiastic about understanding something better than anyone else in the firm. And to that extent, I think I influenced him. And off the back of that, we developed some piece of work that we could use in relation to problems that some of our clients had in relation to this particular piece of legislation. And it generated good income for the firm. So that's probably my first experience of ever unwittingly, but successfully, influencing an outcome or influencing a person. No Twitter, no Instagram, none of that sort of stuff. Just genuine, down-to-earth, authentic influence. And I learned from that. And it wasn't easy. It was a process that you have to go through, but it worked. So if that's how we can understand influence, how can we get better at influencing? Listen before you try to persuade. When you really listen to what someone says, as opposed to just going out and doing stuff or pushing your own barrow, listen, you're doing a couple of things. You're triggering in your brain reciprocity, and in their brain too. They're more likely to listen to you if you listen to them. You learn about what they want and what they think. In turn, they are prepared to do the same to you. That's reciprocity. This gives you more information to inform how you're going to go about influencing them. And finally, it makes you more likable to them. People love to tell you the story. You've given them your time, your most valuable asset. They appreciate that, consciously or subconsciously. People like people to listen to them. Be an expert. Do you actually know your stuff? Exercise your expertise and show you're always improving. That's your expertise, to reinforce the minds of others that you know what you're talking about. Be up to date, be relevant. Evidence your expertise shows others that you are the authority on the particular subject matter. We often hear about the saying that knowledge is power, but it's relevant knowledge is powerful, it's up-to-date knowledge is powerful, and it has to be done or spoken about or discussed. That knowledge needs to be discussed persuasively, and you need to be able to quote the authority for the proposition you make. Not only should you say something that is very persuasive in persuasive language, not only should you be talking about a subject matter that you have knowledge on, but you need to show the authority for the proposition that you are trying to influence about. And that's really important. Lawyers do this all the time in court cases. They don't just go and say, oh, look, judge, I know there's a defense of self-defense in this particular assault charge for their client, but they quote cases which are the same. And they do it persuasively, but they use authority for their proposition. And by the way, don't go off half-cocked. Map out a strategy. Have a strategy. Who are the decision makers? How can I influence them? Don't ever rush in blind trying to influence someone. Who are these people? Do some work on them. Take the time to think it through and map it out. Have a strategy and also have some tactics around that strategy. What happens if something else happens? How do I tactically change? Build connections. I cannot stress enough how important likability is in influencing others. All this talk about how to get what you want can seem overly manipulative and in poor taste. So build a genuine connection. Build genuine rapport with others to not only open your eyes to the way of thinking, but to make it easier for you down the line. Influence is not a one-way street. Your view isn't the only one that counts. For me, strong body language and use of voice is really important. Tonality, pauses, emphasis, language is really important in terms of having others be prepared to listen to you. The most important thing to remember is to back yourself and be confident, but you can't be confident unless you understand how important it is to project a certain tone. And that tone is relevant to your audience. So you gotta know your audience. Julian Treasure's famous TED Talk, How to Speak So People Will Listen, has some great tips on how to do exactly what I'm talking about. This is his HAIL, HAIL method for speaking convincingly. Honesty, be clear and straight up. Authenticity, be yourself. Integrity, live the way you profess. Love, just wish people well. Let them know that you have their best interest at heart. I guess the lesson from all this, and by the way, life's all about learning shit and knowing how to apply it. The lesson certainly for me is know your topic better than anyone else. Make sure you engage those people who can do something with that knowledge. Make sure that you do it not just eloquently, but relevantly. So it's not just the written word if you write it down. It's not just the spoken word if you just speak it. It's both. And it's your preparedness to prosecute it, what you believe in, prosecute it to the end. And at all times, you can't do these things arrogantly. We see politicians make these mistakes in an arrogant way. We've always got to be prepared that we could be making a mistake and that we can, I hate the word, but pivot our way around this and make changes as we go along. I'm not saying you will make changes, but preparedness to do it. In other words, I could be wrong on this, but I think this, and this is why, this is my authority for that proposition. That's the lesson. At the end of the day, you've got to put the effort in. Influence doesn't come without effort.